Now, so that people get an understanding, we were talking about lepidolite, spodumene. Can you tell us, what the business of lithium in regards to those two minerals? Because it's really different, right?
It is. I mean, the lithium and the spodumene occur together, and so you'll find all the mines that are currently mining hard rock lithium in Western Australia have lepidolite associated with the spodumene. Spodumene's popular because you can upgrade it readily easy through physical beneficiation, so you can take 1 to 1.5% ore body and take it up to 6% by floating it off. Lepidolite's a bit more complicated from flotation, and so really it's not that commercial, although about 30% of Chinese production currently comes from lepidolite, but really hasn't been exploited in Western Australia. Now, these two minerals occur together, slightly different, and you'd understand this as a geologist. Lepidolite is a phyllosilicate. It's got a hardness about 6.5 to 7 on the Mohs scale, so about twice of spodumene, and it also weathers a lot harder. And so what we found is, and the hypothesis was that where you see the lepidolite stick out its surface, that's because it's harder and it's much more resistant to weathering. What you should find below the surface is spodumene, and that's really what we'll be chasing with our drilling. When I had a look at some video footage, from high resolution drone of one of our first discoveries at a project called Line, I could see 20 meters apart where these two lepidolite, very thin zones at surface. And when I looked at the structural interp, I figured, I reckon that's going to be spodumene in the middle, because there was a creek running through the middle with the higher ends on either end, the lepidolite. So we mobilized ground penetrating radar really early, and that we fine-tuned that. We did some orientation because we already had mapped a lot of these lepidolites at surface. And bingo, when we got the results back, we had a 20 meter down to 50 meters, which is what we tuned the GPR to. So I'm pretty certain when we drill that, we'll see spodumene in the middle of that pegmatite, which is 20 meters wide. We've mapped it so far down to 20 meters, so we're pretty excited about what we can find with the drilling.
That's interesting, because a lot of narratives out there that I've heard talks about that process of exploring, right, and the difference between lepidolite and spodumene, because that is why I get this. I mentioned this to you before in my previous conversations, that the lithium space is really 2 years old, whereas the rest of the commodities is centuries old.
Yeah.
So what we find here today and what you don't find next door doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because no one's actually looked for it.
Yes, I think you'll find, the Yilgarn and the Pilbara are very different from an exploration discovery for lithium. The Pilbara, because it's virgin rock at surface and you don't have much regolith and development, what you see is what you get. So, the LCT, lithium, cesium, tantalum, if you look at Greenbushes, it was mined before the last century, right? So in the 1880s, it started off as a tin mine. It then became a major tantalum mine, and in fact, GAM, privately owned world's leader of tantalum production, still takes their share of the tantalum that comes out of Greenbushes and process it, right? And it's now primarily a lithium mine. They're retreating the Tails Dam. I think that's a $2 billion project. They've just expanded their production. They produce something like, 27% of the world's lithium at the moment coming out of Greenbushes. So yes, you say it's different, but it's been mined almost continuously at Greenbushes for over 100 years, right?
Yeah.
In the Pilbara, if you look at Pilgangoora, again, that is a tantalum mine, again owned by Talison. GAM still have the rights to the tantalum there, but when they went and looked at the old core and some of the old drill logs, they realized they had lithium. When they started looking on surface, if you go back and look at the announcements that came out of Pilgangoora, originally they were all about lithium. However, when they started drilling deeper, below the surface, that's when they started finding the spodumene. So the spodumene really is a sweet spot. That's because most of the production facilities currently being built in Western Australia and already existing in China are designed and developed to treat spodumene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
yeah. No, I mean it's fascinating because, I mean, for us here at Coffee Samso, we just want to know the ins and outs of the industry, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're giving us an insight as to how it works, because everyone just sees the numbers. Oh,
Yeah.
we got this, we got that, but no one actually talks about, well, how do you find it?
Yeah.
I think that's
The price, obviously, at the moment, it's extremely high, right? If you look at the cut-off grades being used for spodumene, I think for Pilgangura is $750 a ton of spodumene. Well, it's order of magnitude bigger than that,
Yeah.
close to 10 times that value at the
That's
moment. And that'll obviously change, but long term, I'm saying, over the next 15 years, certainly will come down. This will be a commodity, and like most commodities, it'll be supply demand. But I think we're 10 years away from that, just because of the longer period it takes now for mines to get in production. I think the average brine deposit from discovery or decision to mine to production is 8 years, right? And that's unique to the mines. Pilgangura did a great job. Pilbara up at Pilgangura, that really got into production 2.5 years, but they had an existing mine. The facilities were all there, the infrastructure was there, and then they obviously, when they found the spodumene associated with the tantalum deposits, slightly different. It's what we call fractionation. It's how the genesis of these LCTs, and as a chemical engineer, that's easy for me to understand, and maybe we can talk about that later. Where we're doing exploration in Southern Cross, that's very different. Our exploration technology and process there is really to go and look at all of the old gold historic mines, look where we had the pegmatites logged. Only about 3% of pegmatites in WA are LCT, so they're prospective for lithium. And so but at least you're looking at pegmatites from underground logging, often from the old timers. Then we look at the proximity to a granite intrusion, and generally you've got an old granite which has got lithium rich. You've had a new granite which has come up, treated on that, cracked the older granite open, remobilized the lithium out of that, into that liquid solution. And as those rocks have gone along, they crystallize out in sequence. So the lithium, different from at the end, you tend to have the tin to start with, and then the cesium, and the lithium comes out the end in what we call the Goldilocks zone. And you probably find that really in the 3 to 6 kilometers away from where the mineralization went into the greenstones. So although we find all these LCT pegmatites in the greenstones, they have to come out of a granite. So that proximity, and in WA, because the gold minerals or the gold mines and the gold resources were formed at about the same time as the LCT pegmatites, we tend to find them in the same place, although the genesis is totally different. So we're very lucky in WA. We've got this huge history of gold mining, and that gold mining has defined where we like to find the pegmatites. We then look at the proximity, because we've got such a good geological knowledge in Western Australia. Where we're looking in the Goldilocks zone, that's where we're likely to find the LCT pegmatites.